Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Multiple Myeloma Warrior podcast. I'm your host, Noose. I work with Polygon Health, which is the tech platform for the Warriors Group. And what we're working on is creating a one-stop multiple myeloma patient hub where folks can get connected to each other for support, find specialists in their area and centers of excellence, get connected there, get better care, as well as financial resources and access to researchers who are working to improve medications for multiple myeloma and ultimately and hopefully find a cure. Purpose of this podcast is to tell the story of multiple myeloma patients and to help other patients manage and benefit from hearing these stories. And so our warrior of the month is Greg Proctor. We are so blessed to have Greg on our podcast today. And Greg, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about you?
Sure. Thank you very much, Noose. It's an honor and a pleasure, certainly, to be on the program. I'm a big advocate for multiple myeloma, obviously being a patient myself, a survivor, a champion, as well as an advocate, which I was diagnosed back in July of 2021, where at that point in time for me, it took a very tumultuous turn in my life, being an entrepreneur, having many great things going on, and certainly not wanting to go through this journey. And I think one of the most significant things I'd like to highlight here before we get into the discussion is this was during my 50th birthday when I was diagnosed. So I mean, if the man above was telling me something, it was certainly hey, this is your wake up calling.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, you are a patient, a survivor, advocate, Greg. You've even come out with a book, um, Faith, Strength, and Courage. I don't know if you can show a copy of that if you have one on your desk. So I want,
Always.
we were able to secure some of Greg's time. He's on a book tour coming up, and he has done so much in terms of advocacy, and he has a podcast and multiple businesses, and he can talk about that in terms of his introduction. But with the book, Faith, Strength, and Courage, Greg, let's lead there, and what are you trying to get across with this book? Why did you write it? And what's the core message?
Well, I think, first and foremost, the message is at the end of the day, when you're diagnosed with the disease, there's really kind of three fallacies that you have to kind of cope and deal with. One is the acceptance. That's very hard to kind of digest, knowing that you've had a flourishing life and then you're hit with something that typically people say it's a death sentence, or it's a black cloud. And so acceptance is all about the mental fortitude that you have to say that I'm going to live with the disease. The disease is not going to live with me, and I'm going to be in control. That's really kind of the first thing. The second aspect of the book is really to kind of show the indomitable human will that we all have inside of us. Sometimes we don't think we have that DNA when things hit, a point of, pretentious adversity or troubled times. And it doesn't have to be cancer. It can be literally anything. It can be financial. It can be setback with, family members' death, or whatever the case may be. And so understanding that, in these situations, we have been bestowed this indomitable human will to really not give up. As long as we decide, in our minds that we can kind of move forward in life, that these things will continue to flourish for us. And it's just a chapter. It really is something that we just need to kind of pass through, weather the storm, and move forward in our lives. I think the last thing that really resonates with the book, a lot of people say, it's a great comeback story. Greg holds nothing back in the book. I really put you through the lens of my eyes and what it's like to be a multiple myeloma patient. But there's one thing I want to gravitate towards, which hasn't been talked about, based on all the reviews that are out there, is it's about your community. It's about your family. It's about your friends. And I'm going to be the first to say this publicly because, I know I've said it in some of my posts, but I am really grateful to the people that have come into my life through this multiple myeloma community, primarily because they were the ones that really helped push the persona upon me to write a book, because I never even considered writing a book. And believe you me, when I started writing a book, I wrote it in 6 months. It was published by month 9. And I'm just grateful for the community that was out there to really kind of wrap their arms around me, even during the difficult times, and support me in this journey.
No, I mean, such great gems right there. I mean, the community aspect, we're connected through the Warriors group, Alan Stevenson, who's created this group in less than a year, has flourished to, 6.3 thousand people already. And it's just, when you build that authenticity, and I know you talk about this in the book, it really just, it's self-evident. And, people gravitate to that, and people have gravitated to this group, the Warriors group in particularly. And that's how we got connected. And that's how we're going to create even more connections with the technology that I mentioned in the beginning that we're building. It's really going to be completely unrivaled in order to foster more fellowship and spontaneous connections, and people that are going through similar things that you're going through. Yes, multiple myeloma is a big umbrella, but people are at different stages of that. Some people are just diagnosed. Some people are taking, X medication, Y medication, Z medication, going through certain challenges and struggles, whether that's, financial or mental or spiritual or what have you. And so how can we help people get better in a way that's authentic to their journey and where they're at, and help, people meet each other where they are? Does that make sense?
Well, I'm, me being an advocate, I've unraveled a lot of things in this space and in this field of dealing with multiple myeloma. One thing for me, has been like, the emotional roller coaster ride. I mean, certainly, you're not necessarily looking for, a lot of empathy, but you're really looking for that compassion. And what I mean by that is, you want to be treated fair and you want to be treated equally, because when you put yourself out there publicly talking about cancer and you show that vulnerable side of yourself, I always describe it as like you turn on the light and then, the cockroaches kind of, flee, because people that you thought were inside your court are now gone, and people that you didn't think were inside your court are now there to really truly support you. And, it's really kind of uplifting to kind of go through that saga, because you really find out that true purpose and meaningful aspect in life, and who you can really trust upon. And so, the other side of this, outside of just wanting to have that respect and be treated equal as a human being, and not just consider that, you have a disability because you've had cancer. I think people that go through this are the most resilient, tenacious, determined, individuals on the planet, because God, man, your life is on the line. And I mean, what better to exemplify that on a resume is to go through something like this, and really showcase how positive, how inspiring, how uplifting you can be in looking at the positivity in the outlook of this. Now, the second part, to answer your question, and I'm going to take this in a way that, it's going to be very thought provocative, because as patients, we probably don't mind sharing our story. And I mean, we really don't, because first and foremost, we want to be able to help those that, like you said, they're at different stages, newcomers, they're looking for that authenticity, they're looking for that relevance, to help them cope and deal with someone that they can relate to, that's inside their environment, per se. But the one thing I want to say here, as far as an improvement, is at the end of the day, the societies, the foundations, the medical pharmaceutical companies that are out there today, we've got to do better. We've got to do better. I mean, there's billions of dollars being made, and certain percentages of that only go back to patients. And for those of us that are out there lending our voice, that are really advocating, that are really promoting, that are trying to make the cultivated change, not only in legislation and support groups and other variations of things, don't you think it's worthwhile to monetize some of those folks? Because you call them all the time. And I think it's relatively important to basically show that if someone's gone through, like me, $2.75 million of medical costs and burning $50,000 a month just to stay on maintenance,
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Greg, because that is, you know, the underlying mission of Polygon Health, and that's how we got connected to the Warriors Group. We're trying to turn your health into an asset for you, right? So
Bingo.
it is about financial empowerment, which is totally diametrically opposed to the way the things are run today. Let's say, and also educational empowerment and understanding your condition so that you can take less time and get better care and save money and find resources to help you. Because otherwise, as you mentioned in another interview, this can bankrupt you real fast. I mean, you're talking millions
Absolutely.
of dollars. And if you're just uninformed or not connected to the right information, then, this can really just impact your life more than you're already being impacted, with the disease itself. So it's critical that we get together, that we bring, best practices and all the resources available and just connect people to each other and these resources that we're talking about to actually save people's lives.
Right.
Lives are on the line, and we can do better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I totally agree with you. And despite the notion of, before cancer for me, I was, typical A type, entrepreneur and kept a lot of things close to my chest. But this humbling experience, and I say that all the time because it was a humbling experience for me, help open up, my reality and a little bit more of my purpose. Because as I began to share more and more about my journey online, I began to realize how important it was for others to hear that message, despite the pain, despite the vulnerability. Pain became power, vulnerability became opportunity, and those type of things, kind of cascade into a multitude of other opportunities that I've had, throughout my, 3 years of dealing with this disease. But at the end of the day, it's about uplifting, it's about nourishing, it's about helping others without expecting anything in return, and doing that in a way that it really truly comes from your heart. Because if you are a multiple myeloma warrior, then that is the first thing that you're thinking about is, man, I'm going through this. I certainly don't want my friends or family or anyone else to have to go through this, because it is hard. It is really, really hard.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you, I want to make sure I plug your podcast. I've plugged the book. We're going to put links up here before I forget about that. And you have other businesses. And so how do you, from like a time management perspective, how have you sort of taken the bull by the horns and really implement that positive mindset that you talked about at the outset? How can others sort of manage all of this? Yeah.
Well, News, the first thing is, again, you've got to have community around you. Certainly one person cannot do everything, themselves. And when you come into this and you have a flourishing life, and then this disease hits you, this disease takes over. I mean, it literally takes over. I mean, in my case, 6 to 8 hours per day for chemo treatment, Monday through Friday for 3.5 months. That was hard. I mean, I couldn't do much of anything. So I relied on my wife, my brother, my family, my friends, and so forth and so on. But to kind of get to, the answer of the question here is, the positivity comes into play with how well you prepare yourself from the onset. And what I mean by that is, we can stay in a dark space and have this woe is me pity party, and until the cows come home. But at some point, you've got to take a decision. And so that's the first step in the positive direction, when you take that decision to say, okay, yes, I have to live with this. Yes, I have to continue to have treatment. Yes, I have to go through an SCT. These are all things that are going to hopefully, God's will, provide you with long-term survivalship and less reoccurrence of a relapse. And the things that I look at, which I always like to say this in other prior interviews, because I have friends that continue to say, wait a minute, Greg, you look healthy, you look great on the outside, blah, blah, blah. But, you never really know what's going on the inside. And so I always tell my friends, guys, this is a part of my life. Just like I get up and go to work, I have to have treatment 2 times per month. And so for me, just like you live to make money, I live to have treatment. And it's not that I live to have treatment, but I live. I still have life because I'm having treatment, and it's keeping the disease abated. And that's the important aspect that I want to get across here, is because when you decide that you want to live and that you are not ready to move on, things look a lot different. Your purpose looks a lot different. Your life looks a lot different. And you see the world in a much different way, because certain things are just not important. They become quite irrelevant when your life is on the line.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. Okay, so Greg, if you can just take us back to the beginning of the story, right? Who were you before you got the diagnosis? And then when the diagnosis came, how did life radically transform, and, your mindset shift from pre-diagnosis to now this is happening?
Well, Noose, I'm really glad you bring that up. It's probably the first time anybody's asked me that question. My life back then, I was an entrepreneur over 3 companies. Those companies, one was a project management company called Sketcher. The other company was a technological mobile app company, virtual seating technology called TrueSpot. And then, of course, my podcast, which is worldwide known at this stage. Lots going on in my life at the time. People could say, when you read the back of the inscription of my book, it talks about, in a world of chaos, and uncertainty. Well, think about it. I mean, with all of those things going on, my life was pretty chaotic. I mean, I was able to manage all of these different endeavors and continue to kind of flourish and grow. And of course, being in the middle of, one company coming out of the ground, 2 other companies that were already stable, it made for a very unique way in balancing my time management, of course, with my lovely wife, who really is kind of the brainchild behind Kut2ThaChase. I'm just the face. But anyway, trying to balance those things in the best possible way. Yes, they were stressful, but in the same aspect, you do what you love. You have fun, in the aspect of that. So when I started having lower back pain, I was just faced with, okay, take a Tylenol, move on, and continue, just like, most guys probably would do. But the pain continued to persist day after day after day. It just continued to intensify. And the more Tylenol I took, I began to realize this is not working. Well, at the time that I didn't take the warning signs when all of this happened, the one warning sign that really woke me up was the fact that the night that I went to bed after recording some podcasts, I could not move my lower extremities. And a lot of people go, well, wait a minute, how is that even, plausible? How is that possible? The tumor had broke through on my upper right hip area, and it crossed my sciatic nerve. So it produced such an excruciating pain. Then on top of that, I started to, have symptoms of, pain throughout my rib cage and discomfort, and actually realized later on that my stirrup had fractured. So I was in really bad shape. So knowing that all of this was going on, it was like having the rug pulled from underneath me. Here it was as a trajectory of all the businesses and the success, and if you want to call popularity, starting to happen in my life, the notoriety, I was like at a loss. I mean, it was like, okay, so what do we do? And for me, I had to put a lot of things on the shelf. And I mean, it's been 3 years. I'm just now starting to check back into my life, not full extent, but I'm checking back in, in some aspects. And really just trying to move forward, from all of the things that, I would kind of like to leave in the past, but I certainly can't. So for me, it's always been about trying to look at the onset. Like I said before, how do I get through this? How do I navigate the best possible way? And the things that really made me wake up even more outside of not being able to walk was the fact that when I was finally diagnosed, actually probably like a month and a half after I couldn't walk, I was finally diagnosed with multiple myeloma. it wasn't necessarily the diagnosis of multiple myeloma, IgA kappa, P17 deletion, two submutated genes that indicates in layman's terms
Right.
that I'm high risk. But what really resonated with me was my doctor, and I love her to death. I mean, she's certainly a bulldog in a china shop. I mean, if you read the book, you get to really know what type of personality she is. But when she said to us, my wife and I, Mr. and Mr. Proctor, please go home and get your affairs in order.
Wow.
Now, when you hear those words, yeah, cancer is one aspect, but when you hear those words, it's like the question goes up. And at that point in time, you begin to realize that A, you may not want it to be your time, but maybe someone's telling you it's your time. Or B, what am I going to do about it to try and, extend the life of whatever I can do? And so, I just made that commitment. I said, folks, I want the best drugs. I want the least amount of side effects. I will endure whatever you guys can throw at me. And it doesn't really matter if it's the kitchen sink and everything else, but I'm going to get to the other side of this.
Right.
I was a zombie, I was incoherent, everything that we all go through as warriors.
Right.
I dealt with that firsthand. But for me, it was all about the mind. It was all about knowing that I need to get through this, because if I can get through this because of the promise I made to the man above, then I'm going to elevate my voice and bring forth this story in a way that it can really help millions if I can.
Absolutely. And I think it definitely will. So you're based in which state again? Is it Mississippi?
Texas.
Okay, got it. But you grew up in Mississippi, is that right?
I grew up in Mississippi, went off from Mississippi right out of high school, went into the Navy, did 8 years in the Navy, surface and submarine combatants. Also attended, college while I was in the Navy, got out of the Navy, went into the semiconductor industry, where I served 12, 14 years in the semiconductor industry, where I hold multiple patents in the semiconductor industry. Left the semiconductor industry, started up my first consultancy business back in 2004. And I've been pretty much consultancy business, since 2004.
Amazing. No, that's great background. So, when you well, did you get diagnosed locally, or did you go to a larger cancer center, or take me from the point of, the lower extremities weren't working, and then you went to your general practice, or how did you escalate the situation?
Yeah, that's always a story. As you read the book, people go, well, man, that is crazy. This guy must have been like, Superman, which, you find out one of my friends called me that. So yeah, my lower extremities, I couldn't move, couldn't walk. I managed to get out of the bed, and kind of do the army crawl and get to the door and so forth and so on. But the thought process is, okay, finally I can get out of the house after I call my wife. And she's like, maybe you should call the ambulance. I'm like, well, still, I've got to get to the door, to be able to make all this happen. So I managed to get to the door, get down the stairs and so forth and so on. The irony of all of this is like I said, the indomitable human will and strength that we find when we're faced with these adverse points, is that I was so determined to get to my primary care doctor at the time. It didn't matter to me, at the moment in time. Well, how was I going to drive? Because I had like my right side was like, oh man, this is not good. So I ended up driving with my left foot. Of course, we're in the middle of COVID, so there wasn't cars on the road. People were sequestered in their homes. I get to my primary care doctor. He sees me, runs all these crazy tests, blood work as well as x-rays, but he's very limited. I mean, I love him to death, but he's very limited into what he can really see without sending things out to the lab. So he gave me an anti-inflammatory shot, a steroid shot on that day. I came home, with some other, stronger drugs, just to kind of reduce the pain. The pain really wasn't going away. I stayed at home for 48 hours, managed to get up the following week on Monday, go see a spine management specialist. And at that point is where the series of MRIs came into play. And those MRIs were very conclusive. Yep, we see something. Okay, that was without contrast. The second MRI was with contrast. Okay, you need to go see an oncologist, and you need to go see an oncologist right now. Well, we found the oncologist who I talk about in the book. And she said, okay, I've got all of these tests. Yep, they're still inconclusive. I need for you to go do a bone marrow biopsy, PET scan, this, that, and the other. And, at that point, it was pretty much official after all of the other, lead up tests that after the bone marrow biopsy, as to what I had and what I had contracted. And that took, like I said, about 45 days respectively to try to get that all sorted out, which was, to me, it was kind of debilitating because, you still live with all of this uncertainty and
Right.
unease and
Right.
doubt and discomfort and anxiety. And you just try to cope with that the best you
Right.
can because you really don't know, what way things are going to happen. And then when you finally get the diagnosis, it's like, okay, so what are the next steps? And then at
Right.
that
Right.
point, it all becomes, and a lot of times, I use this very loosely, but it all becomes Greek until you
Right.
get educated
Right.
because,
Right.
the drugs, this is the treatment regimen. This is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to do it. And this drug does this drug does that, these side effects. And, for the first couple of weeks, I was just oblivious to it. I was just like, okay, yep, I'm going to get hit with all this stuff and I'm just going to have to live with it. And it wasn't until another friend that I talk about in the book, she kind of, I won't say shook my wife and I, but she was kind of my chauffeur and chaperone taking me to my appointments. She sat us down in her car one day after, a long, grueling chemo treatment appointment for me. And she looked at me and she says, brother, I love you. And she said, you've got a loving, supporting wife that is here for you. But she said, at that moment in time, you have not, she said, you're not in a position to be in control of what's happening right now. You've got to let some of this, go to others.
Right.
And, she was also the one that basically allowed for me to, rekindle my faith through, her guidance and getting me back into church and so forth and so on. So when she stated all those things to us, it was like another epiphany. The first epiphany was Mr. and Mrs. Proctor, get your affairs in order. The
Right.
one before that was go see an oncologist now. But this epiphany was about, look, you got the skills, you got the brain power, you got the intelligence. You need to manage this situation as if you manage these mega multi-million, multi-billion dollar projects.
Right.
And when she said that, it was like, boom.
Right.
I was like, okay, I have a roadmap. And that roadmap was, okay, now my wife becomes the project manager and I become the project. And so we sat down, we put together a game plan, we got ourselves educated, we got involved with communities, we did a bunch of research. People say don't go on Google, but I'll tell you, I mean, it's the best encyclopedia in the world. I mean, where else are you going to go?
Right.
I mean, it's not like you're going to keep calling your doctors and trying to figure out, hey, what's this,
Right.
what's that?
Right.
So it gives you enough education to become inquisitive. And when you're going through this disease, you want to be inquisitive because if you don't go in with preparation as you have your appointments
100%.
and your consultations and
Yep.
things like that, it all becomes oblivious because the
Yep.
doctor's going to say, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. Well, in the case for me, my wife and I put together charts and graphs and, we had everything, trend analysis and so forth and so on. So when we went in my doctor's appointment, we were like, this is what's going on. This is what's happening. These are the things that occurred. This is what we ate. Here's his blood pressure. Here's his weight. Here's this, here's that. So my doctors became like, hey, we need more patients like you because you make our job, quite easy. And so, between my local doctors here, my oncologist, my stem cell transplant doctor, and plus I have a multiple myeloma specialist at Dana-Farber, they all say, Greg, this is nothing shy of a miracle because, your condition was really, well endowed. I mean, you were pretty bad off.
Right.
And, I'm truly blessed that we put together for me, because everybody has to figure this out for themselves.
Right.
But
Right.
we put together for me the best program to get me back. I may not be back to 100%, but
Right.
it
Right.
got me back to where I need to be.
Right. No, that's fantastic. And definitely, that's the amount of preparation that you had going into those meetings. And we're trying to create those as best practices, right? And try to figure out, how people can be educationally informationally empowered
Mm-hmm.
so that they can get better care, which ultimately you got. You were able to figure out, my wife is my project manager, I'm the project,
Mm-hmm.
and how to approach each meeting, in a way that adds value, so that
Bingo.
you can get to a place where, you got to eventually. So on that point, which medications worked for you, which didn't, and like, how did you achieve remission? Did you relapse at any point? Give us a bit about sort of like the treatment course, if you can.
Yeah, well, I'm still on my first line of treatment, which consists of Velcade and Darzalex. Haven't changed. I mean, I continue to maintain an MRD negative. So to kind of give you just a very quick timeline, I was diagnosed in July of 2021. By October of 2021, I achieved remission, and then we started prepping for my stem cell transplant, which actually happened in February of 2022. And I've had four or five, bone marrow biopsies, since all of this, journey has occurred. And, each one has consistently, produced, kind of an MRD negative persona. But, modern medicine is one aspect of
Right.
that.
Right.
It really, really is. And I'm not going to discount it because, all the research and science that goes behind that. I mean, my hat's off to those people because I've seen personally firsthand what that takes to get a drug, out to patients and the
Mhm.
amount of years and things that goes on. But modern medicine being one, food, diet, and health being the other, and number three being your mind as to how you set your standards, your course, and your purpose in life to be able to move forward. And for
Absolutely.
me, I realized that very early on because it's kind of the same analogy I utilize in my own, consultancy business, which relates to, scope, cost, and schedule.
Right.
And so, providing those three triple constraints in my own life, and like I said, utilizing me as a project and my wife as the project manager, those three attributes became very, very important. And so not only did we have modern medicine, that we focused in on, but we also had those other attributes, which were very important because, once I started, introducing, better dietary means, it helped me recover faster from my chemo and immunotherapy. Once I started exercising, it helped me, kind of have the stamina that I needed and a little bit less fatigued than what I was dealing with, so all of these things became excruciating important. And the last point that I want to make when you talk about the transformation that Polygon's trying to do to bring forth best practices and check sheets and so forth and so on, well, I'm going to tell you the number one thing that I believe that people have to do, which sometimes they just shun upon this because they're like, I don't want to do that, I don't want to do that. And when I say this, people are going to be like, oh, well, that does make sense. Understanding your labs. Understanding your labs. Because if you're in a 15-minute consultation with your doctor, he's just going to look down the line and he's going to be like, he or she, okay, everything's good. But
Right.
maybe they're not looking at the trends. Maybe they're not looking at the peaks and valleys. Maybe they're not looking at the creatinine, seeing that you don't have enough water. Maybe they're not looking at your WBC count dropped since, the last time. These things are so freaking significant because you're on treatment, and some treatments tend to, cause those numbers to skew up and down. And sometimes things happen. And so it's very, very important for me. For me, it has been to know my labs inside and out.
That's fantastic. I mean, usually I always ask, what is the number one takeaway? But if I mean, maybe there's another one, but in terms of understanding your labs, that is so critical. We all have personal health stories or know somebody who's gone through something, and I just fully concur that, understanding your labs, I mean, that is the data the doctor is evaluating to put you on whatever course, and any sort of perspective that you can bring to the table that helps further that conversation
Mm-hmm.
can only help your case.
That's right.
So get educated. I'm so glad you mentioned that. So here's a different one. what are any mistakes you made along your whole journey that you wish you could get back, or that would have, shortened, your time frame, or helped you in some way that, as you are where you are now, you look back and you say, man, I didn't have to go through that, or there was a better way. Is there anything that stands out?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you. There is one thing that stands out, and a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this, and I'm sure a lot of other people are guilty for this. It goes back to an old cliche, that we all probably had from our parents, about saving and preparation for the future,
Right.
because you never know what may happen. Now, for us, for my wife and I went from making, buckets of cash to zero cash. And of course, we had assets and other various things, savings and, things that we had. But, when you get into this predicament, it's too late to be reactive, to figure out, well, do you have enough insurance? Do you have enough savings? Do you have enough of this? Do you have enough of that? And so the one thing that I always like to kind of emphasize to people is it's so important now, particularly as you start to get up in age,
Right.
to emphasize that to your kids and to their kids, to ensure that you never know. And it's not just based on the fact that, hey, you need 6 months savings because you don't have a job. Well, yeah, to me, that's kind of irrelevant. But what you really need to look at is what happens if I can't have any income due to illness, due to terminal setback, or whatever the case may be. Right. How long will that, perpetuate in my life before I'm able to get myself back on track? Right. And so in my case, which I talk about in the book, coin collection, we had an extra car, we had things that, materialistic stuff that was like, okay, as we look at this stuff, it's like, hey, we're not going to use it because, right. Every day you're watching your bank account go,
right.
And, we end up selling off, I had like multiple life insurance policies because, obviously running a business and then a personal sure. and so forth and so on. So, we got rid of one of those that provided us with a substantial amount of cash. But, that creative thinking for me was initiated from, my days of managing projects, how to think outside of the box and how to look at my life, in a more clearer view than just what others would perceive of me. Because, in the aspect of trying to live like the Joneses, I mean, that doesn't always benefit, I mean, in certain circumstances like this, for me being 50 years of age and thinking like, okay, maybe I'll work another 10 or 12 years. And then, hey, I want to go retire on an island somewhere, all of that, got shaken up,
right. Oh, for sure. For sure.
And basically you're kind of in a, a little bit of a reset, right? Because the things with me was there was so much uncertain costs because my primary insurance company, which was, commercial, before I switched over to, the VA, they were dragging their feet. So I had racked up probably $250,000, burning $22,500 per week. And my oncologist said, Greg, we're going to stop your treatment. You're going to have to, come up with some cash. And I'm thinking to myself, like, wait a minute, I'm not cured yet. I'm still in the middle of this.
Right.
And so, here it was, I'm grabbing one of my credit cards and I'm like, okay, you know what? Can I give you $10,000? Will this buy me a couple more weeks to go deal with these guys? And that's just something you don't get back. What you get back is life, the ability to live. And so for me, I had to make a lot of those decisions, which I talk about in the book, which are so real because people can actually see that in their own lives when they have to make those difficult decisions and understand the purpose of what's important and what you can live without as you're trying to get to the other side of this tumultuous journey.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, amazing takeaway there in terms of being prepared, right? And creative thinking outside the box, all the scenario analysis that you've done from your project management days and probably your Navy preparation as well, helped you to, figure out survival mode, right? It's
That's right.
It's really like we got to figure out any way possible to move move things forward. So that's great. Are there any sort of last takeaways that we didn't cover, right? So like understanding your labs, right? Being prepared for all scenarios. Maybe give us a last one that you want to just get out there and make sure people understand. And of course, everybody needs to buy Greg's book. The link will be up here. It obviously goes way more than we covered here in the podcast, but give us some final words or anything we didn't cover yet that you want the community to know about, Greg.
Well, I think it's important to live, and what I mean by that is don't let cancer consume your life. I mean, because it can and it will, if you allow for it to consume your life. If you have bucket lists of things that you want to do, well, and you haven't done them prior to cancer, well, guess what? It's time to do them now. I mean, one of the things that my wife and I have put together as an initiative, which is actually happening here in a couple of months, is called Myelo Camino. And we're taking over several multiple myeloma patients, and we're going to walk the Camino de Santiago in Spain in May. And so things that you aspire to do and your purpose in life that maybe you thought about, you put it on the shelf and you've kind of forgot about it, but now you've been faced with this onset or this sleuth of multiple myeloma. Well, enjoy that life, man, because we only have one, and make the best of it and share that experience, share that experience with others, because we need more of that positivity in the space of multiple myeloma versus the negativity. Because as I said before, we don't want to be shone upon. We don't want to be discriminated against. We want to be treated as equal. So what? We had cancer, we've moved on from that. And at the end of the day, raise your voice, because there's always going to be someone else that needs to hear your story.
Amazing. I think that's the best place to end on. Very sage advice. Thank you, Greg, for fitting us in. Please, we're going to add the links to the book. We're going to, if you have the link for maybe other folks want to be on that Spain trip, I don't know if that's something that's possible, but if it is, we'll put that in the description as well. The Facebook link is here as well. So, Greg, anything else where people can find you? There's the Kut2ThaChase podcast. Anything else you want to get out there?
Well, I hate to use this quote because it's a quote that Deion Sanders has on his t-shirt, right? Basically says, I ain't hard to find. So if you put in Gregory O Proctor on Google, I'm sure you're going to find a lot.
Get them all as well.
You're going to, yeah, exactly.
There you go. Exactly. There you go. All right. Thank you, Greg, so much for your time. And, thanks for being the Warrior of the Month, and much luck to you and the book, and to you and your family. We really appreciate everything you're doing for the multiple myeloma community.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.